The wind howled like a wounded beast, scraping across the barren landscape with vicious intent. Alara trudged through knee-deep snow, each step more painful than the last. Her limbs had gone from burning with exertion to a dangerous numbness that crept steadily up her extremities. She clutched her daughter, Lyra, tightly against her chest. The small child bundled in every scrap of fabric Alara could spare, leaving the mother with only a threadbare jacket against the merciless cold. "Just a little further, my love," Alara whispered, though she had been saying those same words for hours. Her cracked lips bled as she spoke, the metallic taste of blood mixing with the bitter cold. The horizon offered nothing but more endless white. The terraforming of Mir 7 had failed catastrophically, leaving behind a frozen wasteland dotted with the skeletal remains of what should have been humanity's new beginning. What had started as ambitious outposts with dream-filled colonists had devolved into desperate enclaves, fighting over dwindling resources. And then, one by one, those enclaves had fallen silent. Alara had been a botanist in the northern settlement, one of the last functioning communities. She had spent years trying to develop crops that could withstand the increasingly harsh climate. But as food stores depleted and the power systems failed, fear had overtaken reason. Whispers spread that the science had caused the terraforming collapse. When the council decided to abandon the settlement and evacuate only those deemed essential, Alara and her daughter found themselves among those left behind. "We can only take those who contribute directly to survival," the council head had announced, his eyes never meeting hers. "A single mother with a young child will consume resources without adequate contribution." Alara had once been respected, consulted even in matters beyond her expertise. Now she was expendable, a burden. The evacuation ships had departed 3 weeks ago. Those left behind had scattered, seeking individual salvation when collective survival had failed them. A particularly violent gust nearly knocked Alara off her feet. Lyra whimpered against her chest, a sound that cut deeper than any cold. The child had stopped crying hours ago, conserving what little energy remained in her tiny body. That quiet resignation terrified Alara more than any tantrum ever could. Up ahead, a dark shape broke the monotonous white landscape. Alara squinted through the swirling snow, hope flaring briefly as the outline of a structure emerged. Not the sanctuary she had prayed for, but a collapsed building, perhaps once a storage facility or research outpost. One wall remained mostly intact, creating a shallow alcove against the wind. It wasn't enough. She knew it wasn't enough, but her body had reached its limit, her maternal instinct to keep moving overridden by physical impossibility. Alara stumbled into the relative shelter of the ruined wall, collapsing onto her knees. With trembling hands, she carefully set Lyra down, checking her daughter's face. The child's lips had taken on a bluish tinge, her eyelids fluttering weakly. "Lyra, stay with me," Alara pleaded, rubbing her daughter's cheeks with fingers too numb to feel anything. "Stay with me, sweetheart." She looked around desperately, finding nothing but broken metal and frozen debris. The wall provided minimal protection from the wind, but the cold was everywhere, seeping through their clothes, their skin settling into their bones. Alara unwrapped the outer layer of Lyra's coverings, her own thermal shawl, now stiff with ice, and shook it vigorously, trying to remove the accumulated snow before wrapping it around them both. She pulled Lyra into her lap, cradling her against her chest, and leaned back against the wall. The storm was worsening. The screaming wind carried ice particles that stung like needles against any exposed skin. Darkness would fall soon, and with it, temperatures would plummet even further. Alara was not naive. She understood the physics of heat loss, the biological processes of hypothermia. She knew what was coming. She remembered reading once that freezing to death was supposedly peaceful at the end. The body shut down systematically, the mind slipping into comforting hallucinations before consciousness faded entirely. She hoped that was true, for Lyra's sake. "I'm sorry," she whispered into her daughter's hair, tears freezing on her cheeks. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save us." Alara pulled the layers tighter around them, creating a small cocoon. She pressed her lips against Lyra's forehead, trying to transfer what little warmth remained in her body to her child. If there was any justice in the universe, Lyra would go first, slipping painlessly into sleep while still feeling her mother's embrace. The wind's howl became a distant roar as Alara's senses began to dull. She closed her eyes, no longer having the strength to keep them open. The cold had become almost bearable now. Another bad sign, she knew distantly. Her thoughts fragmented, memories of warmth and light flickering through her mind. Sunlight through greenhouse panels, Lyra's first laugh, the feel of soil between her fingers. Sleep now, she murmured, uncertain if she had actually spoken aloud. We'll rest now. Alara surrendered to the cold, her consciousness slipping away as the endless white of the storm claimed them both. Warmth. That was Alara's first confusing sensation as consciousness returned. Not the biting agony of frostbitten extremities being re-warmed too quickly, but a gentle, encompassing warmth that seemed to radiate through her core. She kept her eyes closed, certain she was experiencing the final hallucinations before death. Perhaps this was the mercy of the mind, crafting comfort in its final moments. She felt Lyra still clutched against her chest and tightened her grip instinctively. A small sound registered, not the howling wind, but something regular, mechanical. A soft hum, punctuated by occasional clicks. Alara opened her eyes. Dim orange light filled her vision. She blinked slowly, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Not the endless white of snow, nor the darkness of the collapsed building, but walls, actual walls, illuminated by the glow of what appeared to be a heating element. She was lying on something soft, covered with layers of thermal blankets. Lyra was still nestled against her, breathing, actually breathing with color returned to her small face. Alara tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain shot through her body. A soft groan escaped her lips. Don't move too quickly. The voice came from somewhere beyond her field of vision, deep and quiet. Male. Alara's arms tightened protectively around Lyra as adrenaline surged through her system. Your extremities suffered mild frostbite. Nothing permanent, but movement will be painful for a while. A figure moved into view, keeping a respectful distance. A man, tall and lean, with dark hair streaked with premature gray. His face was weathered, eyes tired but alert. He wore layers of utilitarian clothing, patched in multiple places. Who are you? Alara managed, her voice a painful rasp. Where are we? My name is Kale, he replied, retrieving a container and approaching slowly, as one might approach a cornered animal. You're my shelter. I found you and your daughter during my perimeter check. He stopped several feet away and extended the container. Water. Warm, not hot. Small sips. Alara didn't move to take it. Kale sighed softly and set the container down within her reach. I understand your caution. Drink when you're ready. He retreated back to what appeared to be a small workspace filled with tools and mechanical parts. Alara's gaze darted around, taking inventory of her surroundings. The space was small but efficiently organized. One main room, with what looked like sleeping quarters, partially separated by a makeshift partition. Various equipment hummed along the walls. Water reclamation systems, air purifiers, and a heating unit that provided the blessed warmth. Everything showed signs of extensive repairs and improvisation. It was the shelter of someone who had survived alone for a long time. Lyra stirred against her, small, eyes blinking open. Mama? Not cold anymore, she murmured, her voice the sweetest sound Alara had ever heard. Alara's resolve cracked. She reached for the container Kale had left and sniffed its contents cautiously before taking a small sip. It was indeed water, with perhaps some kind of nutrient supplement mixed in. The liquid soothed her parched throat. Thank you, she said finally, the words difficult to form. For saving us. Kale glanced over his shoulder, offering a brief nod before returning to whatever he was working on. He didn't ask questions or demand explanation. The silence should have been uncomfortable, but instead, it felt like a kindness, allowing her the space to process their miraculous survival. Lyra sat up in Alara's lap, curious eyes taking in their new surroundings. Unlike her mother, she showed no fear of the stranger, watching him work with open fascination. "Are you a robot man?" Lyra asked suddenly, her child's logic making the connection between Kale and the machines he tended. Kale turned, surprise registering briefly on his face before his expression softened slightly. "No, just a man who works with machines." "You fixed us like you've fixed machines," Lyra declared with the certainty only a child could possess. Something that might have been amusement flickered across Kale's features. "I suppose I helped, yes." He selected a small container from his supplies and approached again, still maintaining distance. "Broth, more nutritive than water. For both of you, when you're ready." This time, Alara accepted the container directly from his hand. Their fingers didn't touch, but it was a small gesture of growing trust. As the hours passed, Alara watched Kale move through his routine, checking systems, making adjustments, occasionally venturing to what must be an airlock to retrieve items from outside. He worked with practiced efficiency, every movement purposeful. Occasionally, he would glance their way, assessing without intrusion. Night fell, marked only by Kale dimming the lights to conserve power. He offered Alara and Lyra the sleeping area while preparing a pallet for himself near the heating unit. "Why?" Alara finally asked as Kale was settling in for the night. "Why did you help us?" Kale was quiet for so long that Alara thought he might not answer. "Because you were still alive," he finally said, his voice low. "That means something out here." It wasn't until Lyra's breathing had deepened into sleep that Alara allowed herself to cry. Silent tears of relief, fear, and overwhelming gratitude. They had survived, at least for now. Tomorrow's problems would wait for tomorrow. Days passed in the small shelter, marked by the rhythmic cycles of Kale's maintenance routines rather than any natural daylight. Alara's strength returned gradually, though pain lingered in her damaged extremities. Kale provided salves and bandages, demonstrating how to apply them without unnecessary words or touch. Their interactions remained minimal, cautious. Kale never asked why they were alone in the wilderness, and Alara offered no explanation. He shared his resources without complaint, adjusting his consumption to accommodate their needs. The silence between them was rarely broken except for practical matters or Lyra's innocent questions. The child, resilient in ways that continually amazed Alara, had adapted quickly to their new environment. She followed Kale around the shelter, watching his work with curious eyes, occasionally handing him tools when asked. Her natural affinity for mechanical objects, inherited from her father, Alara thought fleetingly, seemed to bridge the uncomfortable gap between the adults. "What does this do?" Lyra asked, pointing to a complex array of pipes and filters. "Water recycling," Kale replied, his typically terse answers becoming slightly more elaborate for the child. "It cleans the water so we can use it again. Like washing hands. Similar principle, more complex process." Alara watched these interactions from her position near the heating unit, where she spent much of her time as her body healed. She noticed how Kale never talked down to Lyra, never dismissed her questions, but also maintained a careful emotional distance. On the fifth day, Alara finally asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "How long have you been here alone?" Kale paused in his work, his back to her. 2 years, 7 months. "Since the final evacuation?" He turned slightly, giving her a measured look. "Before that. I chose to stay when the first outposts were abandoned." "Why?" The question escaped before Alara could consider whether it was too personal. Kale returned to his task, hands moving deliberately over the circuit board he was repairing. "I built most of the environmental systems for the Western settlements. When they started failing, people blamed the engineering. They were wrong." His voice remained even, but Alara sensed the tension beneath. "I stayed to find what really went wrong. Everyone else left." The parallels to her own story were not lost on Alara. Another scapegoat, another person whose expertise had been dismissed when fear overtook reason. "I was a botanist," she offered, the first personal detail she had shared. "At the northern settlement." Kale nodded without looking up. I know. I recognize your name. Your work on cold-resistant crops was referenced in several technical journals I received before communications went down. The acknowledgement of her professional identity, something she had thought lost forever, left Ilera momentarily speechless. She had been reduced to simply mother and then burdened for so long that being recognized for her work felt almost foreign. We shouldn't have been abandoned, she said finally, a hint of the old anger surfacing. No, Cale agreed simply. We shouldn't have. That brief exchange shifted something between them. Not trust, exactly, but recognition of shared experience, of injustice survived, of resilience. That night, when Cale offered their usual portion of the evening meal, Ilera gestured to the space across from her. Join us. The invitation was tentative, uncertain. After a moment's hesitation, Cale sat down, keeping a respectful distance, but sharing their space in a new way. Lyra immediately filled the silence with chatter, describing an imaginary garden she wanted to build when the snow goes away. Neither adult corrected her impossible hope. Watching her daughter animate her story with enthusiastic gestures, Ilera caught Cale's expression, a fleeting softness quickly masked. She wondered what, or who, he had lost when the world froze over. Were you always alone here? She asked softly, while Lyra was distracted with her food. Cale's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. No, he said after a long pause. Not always. He didn't elaborate, and Ilera didn't press. Some wounds were too deep to expose to the air, even in this strange new solidarity they were forming. Later, after Lyra had fallen asleep, Ilera found Cale at his workbench, studying a schematic with intense concentration. Thank you, she said simply. Not just for saving us, but for sharing what you have. I know we're an unexpected burden. Cale looked up, his expression unreadable in the dim light. You're not a burden, he said finally. Having others here, it changes things. For better or worse? Ilera asked, attempting a small smile. Something almost like humor flickered in his eyes. I haven't decided yet. It was the closest thing to lightness they had shared, and Ilera carried the moment with her as she returned to her sleeping daughter, a small warmth kindling alongside the heat from the mechanical unit. The first real crisis came the next morning when a main heating system faltered, temperature dropping noticeably within minutes. Cale was at the control panel immediately, expression grim as he diagnosed the problem. Main heat exchanger is failing. Backup will engage, but won't maintain optimal temperature. How bad? Ilera asked, already wrapping Lyra in additional layers. Not immediately dangerous, but we'll need to repair the primary system within 48 hours before the backup depletes its fuel reserves. His eyes met hers directly. I need to retrieve parts from an abandoned outpost. 2 hours journey each way, minimum. Ilera understood the unspoken concern. We'll be fine here. I can monitor the backup system. Cale hesitated, then nodded briefly. He spent the next hour showing Ilera the basics of the control systems, how to read the gauges, which warnings required immediate action, emergency protocols. His instructions were clear, precise, assuming her intelligence without questioning her capability. Before departing, Cale hesitated at the airlock, looking back at Ilera and Lyra. If I'm not back within 6 hours, there's an emergency protocol document in the storage compartment beneath the main console. It contains coordinates for the nearest known shelter with potential survivors. The implication was clear. If he didn't return, they would need to attempt the journey alone. Ilera nodded, swallowing her fear. We'll be here when you get back. After Cale left, the shelter seemed impossibly quiet despite the labored humming of the backup heating system. Lyra, sensing the tension, stayed unusually close to Ilera, her small hand clutching her mother's as they checked the gauges together. Is Cale coming back? Lyra asked, her voice small. Yes, Ilera answered, with more conviction than she felt. He's very smart and careful. He'll come back. As the hours passed, the temperature continued to drop incrementally. Ilera gathered all available thermal materials into a nest-like structure around the secondary heating unit, creating a warm zone where she and Lyra could conserve body heat. She checked the gauges religiously, watching as the reserves slowly depleted, counting down the minutes of Kale's projected return time. 5 hours passed, then 5.5. "Mama, I'm cold," Lyra whispered, her breath visible in the chilling air. "I know, sweetheart." Alara held her daughter closer, mind racing through options. Should they wait longer? Should they prepare to leave? The thought of venturing back into the frozen wasteland that had nearly claimed their lives once already filled her with dread. Just as she was reaching for the emergency protocol document, the airlock mechanism engaged. Alara's heart leapt to her throat as she pulled Lyra behind her, suddenly aware of their vulnerability. What if it wasn't Kale? What if someone or something else had found a shelter? The inner door opened, revealing Kale's frost-covered form. He was limping slightly, a makeshift pack of salvage parts slung over his shoulder. His face was lined with exhaustion, but his eyes found Alara's immediately. "You're still here," he said, his voice rough from the cold. "We said we would be," Alara replied, relief making her lightheaded. Without further conversation, they fell into surprisingly synchronized action. Alara helped unpack the salvage components while Kale thought enough to work on the repairs. Lyra fetched tools, her small hands eager to be useful. They worked through the night, Kale's expert hands guided by Alara's steady light, occasionally directed by Lyra's sharp eyes, spotting a dropped screw or misaligned connector. Dawn approached, though indistinguishable from night in their windowless shelter, when a main heating system hummed back to life, stronger than before. "You improved it," Alara observed, noticing the more efficient operation. Kale nodded, fatigue evident in every line of his body. The parts one found were from a newer model, more efficient design. He paused, then added quietly, "I didn't expect you to wait." Alara met his gaze directly. Where else would we go? The question hung between them, loaded with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. They had nowhere else, no one else. For better or worse, their survival had become intertwined. Lyra, oblivious to the undercurrents, wrapped her arms around Kale's leg in a spontaneous hug. "We fixed it together," she declared proudly. Kale froze, clearly uncertain how to respond to the physical contact. After a moment, he awkwardly patted the child's head, the gesture clumsy but genuine. "Yes," he agreed softly. Together. Over the following weeks, a tenuous routine established itself in the shelter. Kale continued his maintenance work, now with Alara's assistance. Her scientific background proved valuable, offering new perspectives on ongoing problems. They spoke more freely, sharing technical knowledge that gradually bled into personal history. Alara learned that Kale had been one of the original terraforming engineers, responsible for designing many of the environmental systems that should have made the planet habitable. He had lost his research partner. Alara tactfully didn't press whether the relationship had been more than professional, when accusations about design flaws led to violence in the Western settlement. It wasn't the engineering that failed, Kale explained one evening as they pored over old atmospheric data. Something in the planet's core composition reacted unexpectedly with the terraforming chemicals. "We couldn't have known." The council wouldn't listen to the science, Alara agreed, thinking of her own ignored warnings about soil acidification. They wanted someone to blame. "People fear what they don't understand," Kale said, his voice distant. "Fear makes monsters of us all eventually." Lyra, half asleep nearby, murmured, "You're not a monster, Kale." The simple statement hung in the air, childish perception cutting through adult complexity. Kale's expression softened in that way it only did for Lyra. "Thank you," he said quietly. Alara shared her own story in pieces. Her work in the botanical division, her relationship with a meteorological researcher who had died during an expedition before Lyra was born, the growing paranoia as resources dwindled and her status shifted from respected scientist to unwanted mouth to feed. "They call people like us resource negative," she said bitterly, as if human worth could be calculated in oxygen consumption and caloric intake. Kale's expression darkened. "The same authorities who ignored our warnings, then blamed us for the consequences." Their shared indignation formed another thread in the connection, gradually strengthening between them. No longer just fellow survivors, but allies who understood each other's wounds. Lyra flourished despite their constrained circumstances. Her natural curiosity found endless outlets in Kale's mechanical domain. He began teaching her simple repairs, her small hands sometimes more adept at reaching delicate components. She soaked up knowledge eagerly, her mind unhindered by the trauma that had shaped her survival. Alara watched their interactions with complex emotions. Gratitude for Kale's patience, wonder at her daughter's resilience, and sometimes an ache for what might have been in a different world. A normal childhood with open skies and growing things, not this metal box and perpetual fight against the cold. The catalyst for deeper change came unexpectedly. During routine maintenance of the exterior sensors, Kale detected an anomalous signal, brief but distinctive. Could be equipment malfunction, he said, though his expression betrayed his doubt. Or it could be another shelter, attempting communication. Other survivors? Alara's heart raced at the possibility. Possibly. Kale's tone was cautious. Or it could be automated systems still running in abandoned facilities. Either way, I need to investigate. We'll come with you, Alara said immediately, surprising both of them. Kale frowned. Too dangerous. The weather patterns are unpredictable this season. We've already survived the worst the cold could offer, she countered. And 3 people have better odds than one alone. The argument continued into the night, not heated, but persistent. Alara insisted on accompanying him, pointing out her scientific expertise might be valuable. Kale resisted, citing the dangers, particularly for Lyra. I won't risk her safety, he said finally, a crack in his usually controlled demeanor. I can't be responsible for her. He stopped abruptly. Alara understood the unspoken fear. For losing someone else, she finished gently. Kale turned away, but not before she caught the flash of old pain in his eyes. The risk. Calculation doesn't support bringing a child. And the risk calculation of you going alone and not returning? What happens to us then? Alara challenged. We survive together or not at all. That's the reality now. Their gazes locked, a silent battle of wills and fears. Finally, Kale's shoulders dropped slightly. 3 days of preparation, he conceded. We upgrade all cold weather gear, test the portable shelter, pre-map multiple return routes. Alara nodded. Understanding this was as close to agreement as she would get. 3 days. The preparations were intensive, consuming every waking hour. Kale's thoroughness bordered on obsessive, but Alara matched his determination. They modified their limited cold weather gear, creating a special carrier that would allow Lyra to be strapped to either adult while maximizing heat retention. They packed emergency rations, portable heating elements, signal devices. Throughout it all, Lyra watched with solemn eyes, somehow understanding the gravity of their undertaking. She followed instructions precisely, practicing emergency procedures without complaint, memorizing safety protocols that no child should have to know. On the eve of their departure, as Lyra slept, Alara found Kale making final adjustments to their gear. You're still against this, she observed quietly. Kale didn't look up from his work. Yes, but you're still helping us prepare. His hands stilled. Because you're right, he admitted reluctantly. Your chances without me are worse than our chances together. He finally met her gaze. I've been alone so long. I forgot what it means to be responsible for others. Is that how you see us? As a responsibility? The question slipped out before Alara could consider its implications. Kale was silent for a long moment. No, he finally said, his voice low. Not anymore. The admission hung between them, neither ready to explore its full meaning. We should rest, Alara said eventually. Tomorrow will test all of us. Kale nodded, but as she turned to go, he spoke again. Alara. Her name sounded different in his voice, not just a label, but something valued. Whatever we find out there, we come back together. All of us. It wasn't quite a promise, but in their uncertain world, it was as close as anyone could offer. The journey began at what Kale's instruments designated as dawn. The world outside the shelter was a hostile expanse of white, broken only by the jagged remains of failed human ambition. The cold was immediate and vicious, seeping through their layers despite all preparations. Lyra, secured in the carrier on Kale's back, peered over his shoulder with wide eyes, her breath forming tiny clouds inside the protective face shield. Alara carried most of their equipment, allowing Kale to move more easily with the child. They followed the signal's coordinates, traversing the frozen landscape with careful precision. Kale's experience navigating the exterior environment was evident. He chose paths that minimized exposure, recognized dangerous ice formations before they became threats, constantly monitored weather patterns on a portable device. The first day passed without major incident, though the pace was slower than anticipated. They established the portable shelter as darkness fell, a technological marvel that expanded from a compact package into a minimalist but functional haven against the elements. Inside the temporary shelter, they huddled close for warmth, the proximity more necessary than uncomfortable now. Lyra fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the journey. Alara and Kale spoke in whispers, reviewing their progress, adjusting plans for the next day. The signal is definitely artificial, Kale confirmed, showing Alara the readings on his device. Repeating pattern, consistent intervals. Human design, Alara agreed. But that doesn't guarantee human presence. No, Kale acknowledged. But it's the first new signal I've detected in over a year. The hope in his voice, however restrained, was unmistakable. Alara reached out impulsively, her gloved hand covering his. Whatever we find, we've already beaten the odds. He didn't pull away from the contact. In the dim light of their temporary haven, surrounded by endless winter, something shifted between them, a boundary crossed without words. The second day brought new challenges. The terrain became more difficult, requiring careful navigation around collapsed structures and treacherous ice formations. Midday, a weather alert sounded on Kale's monitoring device. Pressure system changing rapidly, he announced, face grim as he studied the readings. Storm front moving and faster than predicted. Alara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the external temperature. How long? 6 hours, maybe less. We need to divert to alternate shelter coordinates. He pointed to a ridge in the distance. Beyond that formation, there's the remains of a research outpost. Partial underground structure might still be intact. The change in plans added urgency to their journey. Kale transferred Lyra to Alara's carrier, taking the heavier equipment to increase their pace. They pushed forward relentlessly, the sky darkening ominously above them. The first wind gusts hit as they reached the ridge, powerful enough to nearly topple Alara despite her careful footing. Kale grabbed her arm, stabilizing her and Lyra with surprising strength. Almost there, he shouted over the rising storm, pointing to a half-buried structure ahead. They reached the abandoned outpost just as visibility deteriorated to near zero. The entrance was partially collapsed, requiring Kale to clear debris while Alara sheltered Lyra from the worsening conditions. Quickly, Kale directed once he'd created a passage large enough to squeeze through. The interior was dark and cold, but blessedly free from the wind's fury. Kale activated portable lights, revealing a space that had once been a monitoring station. Most equipment was destroyed or stripped, but the structural integrity of the underground section remained sound. We'll wait out the storm here, Kale decided, already setting up their emergency heating unit. Could be 24 hours before it's safe to move. Alara nodded, helping Lyra out of the carrier and checking her for any signs of cold damage. The child was remarkably calm, her trust in the adults complete. Is this where the signal came from? Lyra asked, looking around curiously. Kale shook his head, crouching beside her. No, the signal origin is still a day's journey ahead. This is just a safe place until the storm passes. They settled in for an uncomfortable wait, the portable heating unit providing minimal comfort against the deep chill of the abandoned structure. As night fell outside, detectable only by Kale's timekeeper, the storm intensified, its howl penetrating even their underground shelter. Lyra couldn't sleep, unsettled by the storm's fury. She clung to Alara, small body tense with fear she tried bravely to hide. "Would you like a story?" Kale asked unexpectedly, his usual reserve softening in response to the child's distress. Lyra nodded eagerly, always hungry for stories despite her fear. Alara watched in surprise as Kale settled beside them, closer than his usual careful distance. "I once helped design a dome," he began, his deep voice oddly soothing against the storm's wail. "A magnificent structure of glass and steel that covered an entire valley. Inside, we created gardens with plants from Earth, real trees that grew taller than buildings, flowers in every color imaginable, birds that sang songs no one on this planet had heard before." Lyra's eyes widened. "Was it warm there?" "Very warm," Kale confirmed. "Warm enough that people wore light clothing and children ran barefoot through grass." "Real grass," Lyra breathed, the concept almost mythical to a child who had known only ice and metal. "Real grass, soft and green." Kale continued his description of the biodome that had existed during the early terraforming years before the catastrophic climate shift. His technical knowledge blended with surprisingly poetic detail, the quality of light through the transparent panels, the sound of water in artificial streams, the scent of growing things. Alara listened, equally captivated. She had arrived on the planet after the biodomes had already failed, had never seen the marvels he described. In Kale's words, she glimpsed the man he might have been before loss and isolation had shaped him, passionate about his work, capable of appreciation beyond function, someone who created beauty alongside utility. Lyra eventually drifted to sleep, soothed by the vision of impossible warmth. Kale fell silent, his gaze distant with memories. "Was it real?" Alara asked softly. "The biodome you described?" Kale nodded slowly. "The Central Valley Project. It survived for 3 years before the core temperature drop compromised the heating systems." His expression clouded. 2,000 species of plants lost in a single night when the temperature controls failed. "You blame yourself," Alara observed, not a question. "I designed those systems," he replied simply. "When they failed, I should have found a solution." "No one could have predicted the planetary core changes," Alara countered. "You created something beautiful, even if it was temporary." Kale looked at her with surprise, as if this perspective had never occurred to him. "Temporary beauty is still worth creating? Isn't all beauty temporary, ultimately?" Alara smiled sadly. "That doesn't diminish its value." Something shifted in Kale's expression, a softening, a recognition. He reached out slowly, hesitantly, and brushed a strand of hair from Alara's face. The touch was brief, tentative, but sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with external temperature. "We should rest," he said, withdrawing his hand. "The storm may break by morning." But neither moved to increase the distance between them, and when Alara eventually drifted to sleep, it was with the unfamiliar comfort of another adult's presence beside her. The storm raged for 2 full days, far longer than Kale's initial estimate. Their supplies dwindled, carefully rationed to extend as long as possible. The waiting was hardest on Lyra, her boundless energy contained in the small safe space they'd established. Kale surprised Alara by creating simple games from salvaged materials to keep the child occupied, puzzles made from circuit boards, treasure hunts among the abandoned equipment. When the storm finally abated, they emerged into a transformed landscape. Snow had drifted into new formations, covering some landmarks and revealing others previously buried. Kale spent precious time recalibrating their navigation equipment, ensuring they could still locate both the signal source and their way back to the main shelter. "The signal is still active," he confirmed, a hint of excitement breaking through his usual reserve. Stronger now that we're closer. They resumed their journey with renewed purpose, though the extended storm had depleted their reserves more than planned. Kale led them through the altered terrain with careful precision, occasionally carrying Lyra when the drifts became too deep for her to navigate even with assistance. By mid-afternoon, they crested a ridge and stopped in collective surprise. Below them, partially buried in snow but unmistakable, stood a structure unlike any they had encountered since leaving the settlements. Not a ruin, not an abandoned outpost, but an intact facility with clear signs of active systems. Minimal but distinctive heat signatures visible on Kale's scanner. That's not possible, Alara breathed, staring at the readings. All authorized settlements were evacuated or destroyed. Unauthorized, then, Kale concluded, someone else who chose to stay, or couldn't leave. They approached with caution, Kale insisting on scouting ahead, while Alara and Lyra waited at a safe distance. He returned 30 minutes later, his expression a mixture of confusion and intrigue. It's a research station, he reported. Independent operation, not colonial authority design. The signal appears to be an automated distress beacon, but there are signs of recent activity. Someone's alive in there? Alara asked, hope and apprehension mingling. Can't confirm without entering, Kale replied. External indicators show minimal life support functioning, but that could be automated systems. They debated briefly about how to proceed. Alara advocated for direct approach. If survivors were present, they would need to establish friendly intentions immediately. Kale favored continued observation before revealing themselves, wary of unknown motivations. The decision was ultimately made by their dwindling supplies and the forecast showing another weather system approaching within 48 hours. They needed shelter, and the facility represented their best option. Kale approached the main entrance first, Alara and Lyra following several paces behind. The access panel was functional but secured. Kale connected his portable device, attempting to interface with the security system. Research-grade encryption, he muttered, fingers moving rapidly across the interface. But older generation protocols. The door slid open with a hiss of equalizing pressure, revealing a dimly lit airlock. They entered cautiously, the automatic decontamination sequence initiating as the outer door sealed behind them. Someone maintained basic systems, Kale observed, examining the functional airlock controls. Power conservation mode, but operational. The inner door opened to a space that differed dramatically from their expectations. Unlike the utilitarian design of colonial facilities, this space contained elements of personalization, faded imagery on walls, non-standard furnishings, evidence of long-term habitation rather than temporary research. Most surprising were the plants, actual living plants in containment units along one wall. Small, struggling specimens under artificial lighting, but undeniably alive. Lyra gasped, pulling away from Alara to approach the nearest container. Green, she exclaimed, reaching toward a small, leafy plant before Alara gently caught her hand. Don't touch yet, she cautioned, professional instincts awakening. We don't know what they are. Arctic moss variants, came a voice from the shadows. Modified for extreme, cold tolerance. Harmless to touch, though I'd appreciate if you didn't disturb them. They're quite sensitive to environmental changes. Alara and Kale turned sharply toward the voice. From a connecting doorway emerged a figure, an older man with a shock of white hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He leaned heavily on a makeshift cane, his thin frame draped in layers of patchwork clothing. Despite his apparent physical frailty, his eyes were sharp, assessing the intruders with keen intelligence. You responded to my beacon, he stated, a hint of surprise in his voice. I've had it broadcasting for over a year. No one came. I'd nearly given up. We didn't know what we would find, Kale replied cautiously. The settlements were evacuated. The old man's expression darkened momentarily. The official settlements, yes. My facility was never part of the colonial authority. Independent research. He gestured toward the plants, looking for native solutions rather than imposed ones. You're a botanist? Alara stepped forward, professional curiosity piqued. Dr. Erickson, xenobotanist. The man's gaze moved between them, lingering on Lyra with evident surprise. A child? Extraordinary. I hadn't thought any survived the evacuations. We were left behind, Alara said, a hint of old bitterness coloring her words. Dim de non essential. Dr. Erickson nodded slowly, unsurprised. The authorities were never concerned with individual lives, only statistical outcomes. He turned, gesturing for them to follow. Kulme, if you've traveled far, you must need rest and sustenance. I have limited resources, but enough to share. They followed him through the facility, larger than it appeared from outside, with multiple connected chambers. The design was ingenious, maximizing heat efficiency through structural choices that Kale commented on with professional admiration. The central living area was sparse, but comfortable by their recent standards. Dr. Erickson activated additional lighting and heating, explaining that he conserved energy when alone. The geothermal tap is stable but limited, he explained. Enough for one person to live comfortably or several to survive adequately. You've been here since the evacuations? Kale asked, still surveying the systems with professional interest. Before that, Dr. Erickson corrected. I never joined the official settlement program. Too restrictive in their thinking, too certain of their predetermined solutions. He gestured toward a display showing botanical data. I came to study potential symbiosis between introduced Earth species and native extremophiles. The colonial authority called it fringe science, refused funding. But you found something, Ilera guessed, examining the plant specimens with growing excitement. These aren't just surviving, they're adapting to local conditions. Dr. Erickson smiled for the first time, professional recognition clearly pleasing him. Precisely. The conventional terraforming approach was fundamentally flawed. Try to force Earth conditions onto a non-Earth planet. My approach seeks to find the middle ground, organisms that can bridge the gap. While the scientists discussed botanical possibilities, Kale explored the facility's mechanical systems with Dr. Erickson's permission, Lyra following him closely as always. Their voices drifted back occasionally. Kale's questions about power distribution, Lyra's delighted discoveries of new mechanical wonders. Your companions, Dr. Erickson observed quietly to Ilera. The man is clearly an engineer of considerable skill. And the child? My daughter, Ilera confirmed. Lyra, and you are? Ilera, former botanical research lead at the Northern Settlement. Recognition flashed in the old man's eyes. The cold-resistant crop program. I read your papers. Promising work before the council reallocated resources to evacuation preparations. The validation of her professional identity warmed Ilera unexpectedly. The crops might have succeeded given more time, she admitted. But panic overruled patience. The eternal human failing, Dr. Erickson sighed. But perhaps not our only trait. He nodded toward where Kale was showing Lyra how to trace a power conduit, her small face alight with curiosity. Adaptation, cooperation, these serve us better than fear, in the end. That evening, they shared a meal unlike any since the settlements collapsed. Simple, but containing elements of fresh plant matter, cultivated in Dr. Erickson's experimental gardens. For Lyra, who had never tasted anything but processed rations, the experience was transformative. She chewed each bite with wide-eyed wonder, declaring the strange vegetables the most beautiful food ever. As Lyra's energy finally waned and she drifted to sleep in a comfortable nest of blankets, the adults spoke more openly. Dr. Erickson shared his ongoing research, the slow but promising adaptation of Earth plants to the harsh conditions, the discovery of native organisms with unexpected properties, the possibility of creating sustainable microenvironments. Not terraforming an entire planet, he explained, but creating habitable niches. Islands of life in a hostile sea. Like what we've done, Kale observed. Our shelter, now this facility. Islands of survival. Precisely, Dr. Erickson agreed. But more than mere survival is possible. That's what I've spent my life trying to prove. Later, when Dr. Erickson had retired to his quarters, Ilera and Kale spoke quietly beside the sleeping Lyra. His work is legitimate, Ilera said, still processing the implications. Preliminary, but the approach makes sense. Working with the planet's conditions rather than against them. The facility is sound, Kale added. Better designed than our shelter in many ways. The geothermal connection provides more stable energy than our recycling systems. They both understood what remained unspoken. The possibility of staying of joining forces with Dr. Erickson rather than returning to their isolated existence. "He's old," Alara said softly. "He admitted he activated the beacon because his health is declining. He needs help maintaining this place. And we need what he has," Kale acknowledged. "The botanical research, the stable power source." He paused, then added more hesitantly, "Lyra deserves to see growing things." The statement revealed how far Kale had come from the isolated survivor who had rescued them, now considering not just survival, but quality of life, particularly for a child not his own. "We should offer to relocate here," Alara suggested. "Combine our resources, our knowledge." Kale nodded slowly. "A more sustainable solution for all of us." His hand found hers in the dim light, the contact no longer hesitant or accidental. A better island. The decision made, they allowed themselves to rest, the prospect of a new beginning, however modest, providing a peace neither had experienced since the world froze around them. Morning brought practical discussions with Dr. Erickson, who embraced their proposal with poorly disguised relief and enthusiasm. Plans were made to retrieve essential equipment from Kale's shelter, to integrate their knowledge and resources to expand the facility's capacity prudently. "Your engineering expertise will be invaluable," Dr. Erickson told Kale. "And your botanical background complements my work perfectly," he added to Alara. As for young Lyra, his eyes crinkled with genuine warmth. "A child's perspective reminds us why we persevere." The journey back to Kale's shelter was arduous but undertaken with new purpose. They collected critical components, personal possessions, and data storage. The record of both Kale's and Alara's previous work, now valuable contributions to their joint future. Weeks passed as they established new routines in the expanded facility. Kale improved the power systems, increasing efficiency and range. Alara worked alongside Dr. Erickson, her practical crop experience complementing his theoretical approach. Lyra divided her time between helping the adults and learning from all three, absorbing knowledge from diverse fields with a child's effortless adaptability. The first significant breakthrough came when one of Alara's hybrid grain specimens successfully germinated in a mixture of earth soil and processed local minerals. A small victory, but symbolically powerful, proof that life could not only endure but evolve and thrive, even here. "It's beautiful," Alara whispered, carefully documenting the tiny green shoot. Kale stood beside her, closer than he would have allowed himself months ago. "You're beautiful," he said quietly, the words clearly unplanned. Alara looked up in surprise, meeting his gaze. The man who had pulled her and Lyra from the brink of death had changed, or perhaps simply revealed more of who he had always been beneath layers of isolation and self-protection. His eyes held something beyond respect or companionship now. "We found more than survival," she acknowledged, brave enough to name what had been growing between them. "I didn't expect," Kale began, then stopped, struggling with words that had gone long and used. "I thought I would die alone here. I had accepted that. And now," Alara prompted gently. His hand reached up, hesitantly brushing her cheek in an echo of that moment during the storm. "Now I find myself hoping for more than just continued existence." The admission cost him visibly, a man long accustomed to expecting nothing beyond the next breath, the next heartbeat, now daring to want something that could be lost, could cause pain in its absence. Alara understood the risk he was taking. She had loved before, had lost, had built walls of her own. Lyra had been the only breach in those defenses for so long. "Hope is dangerous," she acknowledged, "but so is its absence." She leaned forward slowly, giving him time to retreat if he needed. He didn't. Their kiss was tentative, questioning, then answering, warm like nothing else on this frozen world. From the doorway came a small giggle. They separated to find Lyra watching them with uncomplicated delight, Dr. Erickson behind her with a knowing smile. "About time," the old scientist remarked mildly. "Life finds a way, even in the most hostile environments. That's been my thesis all along." As spring approached, a nominal season change marked more by instrument readings than perceptible differences outdoors. Dr. Erickson's health began to decline more rapidly. He approached this fact with the same analytical clarity he brought to his research, cataloging symptoms and calculating probabilities without self-pity. "My work will continue through you," he told Alara and Kale one evening. "That's all anyone can hope for. Not immortality, but continuation. Impact that outlasts our individual existence." They had grown close to the old scientist, his wisdom and unexpected humor brightening their days. Lyra especially had bonded with him, sitting for hours as he taught her to care for the growing collection of plant specimens, telling her stories of Earth's diverse ecosystems that seemed like fantastic fairy tales to a child born on this frozen world. When the end came, it was peaceful. Dr. Erickson simply failing to wake one morning, his body finally surrendering to age and the planet's harsh conditions. They mourned him properly, Kale constructing a memorial marker placed among the thriving plants in the main laboratory. "He gave us more than shelter," Alara said, standing with Kale and Lyra before the simple monument. "He gave us purpose beyond survival. And family," Lyra added with a child's directness, her small hand in Kale's. "He helped make us a family." Kale knelt to Lyra's level, something he would never have done when they first met. "We were becoming a family already," he said gently. "But you're right, he helped us see it more clearly." One evening, as a rare break in the cloud cover revealed unfamiliar stars, Alara found Kale on the facility's small observation deck. He was studying old terraforming schematics, making notes and calculations. "Still working?" she asked, joining him. He shook his head, revisiting. These were the original plans, before the authorities rushed implementation and doubled chemical catalysts against recommendation. "Looking for what went wrong. Looking for what could still go right," he corrected, showing her his notes. On a smaller scale, Erickson's approach applied to controlled areas. Alara studied the modifications he proposed, targeted environmental adjustments rather than planetary overhaul, working with existing conditions rather than fighting them. "You think it's possible?" she asked, "to create truly sustainable habitats here?" "Not quickly," Kale admitted. "Not in our lifetime, perhaps. But eventually." He gestured to the star-flecked sky. "The evacuation ships left, but who knows if they found anything better. Maybe the future of humanity isn't out there after all. Maybe it's here, growing slowly, adapting like Erickson's plants." Alara leaned against him, sharing warmth as they contemplated the vastness above. A future for Lyra, then. Something to build toward. For Lyra, Kale agreed. And perhaps others eventually. The implicit question hung unspoken between them. Alara smiled, taking his hand and placing it over her abdomen. "Perhaps sooner than you think," she said softly. Kale's expression transformed, wonder and fear and joy cascading across features once frozen in stoic survival. "You're certain?" She nodded, as certain as one can be with limited medical equipment. 2 months, approximately. His arms encircled her, protective and reverent. "I never thought. After everything." "Life persists," Alara whispered against his chest. "Against all odds, life finds a way." Below them in the laboratory, Erickson's plants continued their slow, stubborn growth. Outside, the endless winter still gripped the planet. But within their small sanctuary, spring had arrived at last. Not in the external environment, but in the warmth between them, in the child sleeping peacefully nearby, in the new life beginning against all probability. Alara remembered that desperate day, huddled against a ruined wall, wrapping Lyra in her final embrace as she surrendered to the cold. How close they had come to becoming 2 more casualties of a hostile world. How unexpected their salvation had been. She had closed her eyes to die in the cold, but had awakened to warmth. Not just physical heat, but the warmth of connection, of purpose restored, of love found in the most unlikely circumstances. Outside, the stars continued their distant burning. Inside, a smaller but no less miraculous light persisted, the light of human resilience, of adaptation, of hope rekindled from the faintest spark. Not just survival, but life. Real life, with all its mess and beauty, its pain and joy, continuing even here, at the frozen edge of possibility.